Hi everybody. Today I'm going to talk about one approach to implementing Office business applications where you use Excel and VBA and OpenXML together. OpenXML is great at a lot of things, but there are areas where a better solution is to implement the functionality you need using VBA in Excel. And while VBA is great at giving interactivity to your Excel spreadsheet, it's not so good at interfacing with .NET. Each one of these tools is powerful in its own right. They just have to be used in the appropriate way. First, as an introduction, I'm going to discuss tables in an Excel spreadsheet and discuss how you can interact with those tables using Link to XML and the OpenXML SDK. Here I have an Excel spreadsheet. Now in this particular case, it's a macro-enabled Excel spreadsheet, OpenXML spreadsheet. You can tell this because it has the file extension of XLSM instead of XLSX. Here we can see in this workbook and worksheet that I have a couple of tables. These tables have the same set of columns. They have different data. I set up these tables to have the same set of columns on purpose so that I could show some interesting functionality. These tables, they each have 3 columns, number, name, and age. And if I click on the Design tab, then I can see that this first table has a table name of age list. In other words, it's a list of ages. And this table has a table name of age list 2. The actual details here don't really matter. I'm really interested in discussing the big picture of how to implement a certain set of functionality. The actual schema of these tables is not so important. And here I have an OpenXML SDK application. And in this OpenXML SDK application, I am using this module LTX OpenXML. LTX OpenXML is a module that I wrote some time ago that makes it easy to use Link to query Excel tables. So here we can see that the code first opens up the spreadsheet document and then it calls query table, first passing the name of the first table, which is age list, and then passing the name of the second table, which is age list 2. And over here in this query table method, you can see that what the code does is write out the column headings and then it writes out all the data in the table. And when I run it, we can see that in fact it does print out first of all the data in age list and then the data in age list 2. Well, that's all fine and good, and in fact the functionality in Excel to maintain these tables is pretty sophisticated. It's pretty user-friendly. So for instance, I can tab here and I can enter 5 and I can enter a name Brant and I can enter 62. And that added a new row to that table. And I can come down here and I can click on a row and I can right click and I can delete a row in the table. That's easily enough done. But sometimes you want more functionality and a better user interface than what I've presented here. You may, for instance, want to put up a form and enable the user to enter data in the form and then insert that data into one of these lists. You may want to clear the list. You may want to programmatically find rows and delete rows in the list. You may want to programmatically insert rows in the list. This is where VBA can help a lot. I've written a little VBA application to help us manipulate these lists. I'm going to click on the Developer tab and I'm going to go to the Visual Basic editor. I am going to run the application. So now we can see a bunch of buttons that enable us to manipulate these lists. So for instance, I can delete table 1, I can delete table 2, I can create table 1, I can create table 2. If I try to create table 1, again, it tells me that the table already exists. If I delete the table and try to delete it twice, it tells me the table does not exist. I can clear table 1, I can clear table 2. I can insert a row into table 1 and a row into table 2. I can delete a row also in either of the two tables. And here's where some functionality gets a little bit interesting. I can copy table 1 to table 2, and there you can see now table 2 has the same data as table 1. Here I'll delete table 2 and I'll recreate it, and I can also copy table 2 to table 1. This code is fairly robust in how it handles tables with different numbers of rows. So for instance, here I can insert a row, insert a row, insert a row, insert a row into table 2. So table 2 now has 7 rows. And I will delete 2 rows in table 1. And I can now copy table 2 to table 1. And table 1 now has the same 7 rows that table 2 had. And the same thing is true if, for instance, I delete all the rows in table 1 and then I copy table 1 to table 2, whereas table 2 used to have 7 rows, it now has just 1 row. So these atomic operations enable us to kind of sling these tables around, do whatever we need to, create new tables, insert data in the tables, delete data in the tables, copy them around, and so on. And finally, I've got a couple of buttons over here that enable us to query the data in these tables using VBA. So I can list all the tables and I can list all the data. So if I delete both tables and list all the data, we can see here that the data is exactly as we have in those tables. Let's take a minute and do a quick scan through this VBA code so that we can see how it interacts with those tables. I'll open up the VBA editor and I'll view code. Here is the code to create a table. First thing that this code does is set some values in some cells. And then after it set those values, it can call activeworkbook.sheets, passing the name of the sheet, .listObjects.add. One key point about this is that while in the Excel user interface, these are called tables, in the VBA programming interface, these are called list objects. Just something to remember as you go about writing VBA code to manipulate these tables. Here you can see that after I created the table, I applied a table style to the table. Here's the code to delete a table. First thing that this code does is it retrieves the table by using the active workbook, dotting into the sheets function, then dotting into list objects, passing the name of the table, and then if the table exists, then it deletes the table. Here's the code to clear a table. As before, this code first of all gets the table by using the list objects method, passing the name of the table, and then after retrieving the table, it gets the number of rows in the table. It then creates a range on the table that does not include the header row, and then it calls the delete method. Here's the code to insert a row at the bottom of a table. As usual, it gets the table object. After getting the table object, it calls this listrows.add method, passing an argument always insert, which is set to true. The return value of this add method is set to this new row variable. And then with that new row variable, the code sets the values of the respective cells in that row. Here's the code to delete a row. As usual, the code gets the table that we're interested in working with, and then it dots into the .range property, then the .rows property, passing in the row number to delete, and then dotting into the delete method. Finally, last and not least, is the code to copy one table to another table, provided that they actually have the same columns in both tables. First of all, this code makes sure that both tables exist, and then if both tables exist, it then clears the destination table. It clears the destination table by getting the number of rows, creating a range that is appropriate, and then calling .delete. This is identical to the code that we use to clear a table. It then gets the number of rows in the source table. After getting the number of rows in the source table, it then gets the range for the source, calls the .copy method, then gets the range for the destination, and it starts out with this range $A, $2, and then calls the .resize method, passing in the number of rows in table 1 minus the heading row. This 3 is the number of columns in table 1. And by doing it in this fashion, we make sure that the number of rows and number of columns are the same for this copy operation. Finally, I can insert a few more rows into table 1. I can delete a couple of rows from table 2. I'll close that window. I'll save the workbook and close it. Come back over to Visual Studio, run my little example application, and we can see that we used Link to XML and the OpenXML SDK to retrieve all of that data from those two tables. You can use the techniques that I discussed here in this video in combination with the techniques that I discussed in two previous videos. The first one shows how to customize a ribbon in an Excel spreadsheet, and the second one shows how to create a VBA add-in with a customized ribbon in an Excel spreadsheet. The combination of creating this add-in, using VBA Code to manipulate these tables, and then using OpenXML to retrieve the data from those tables makes it easy to build powerful applications. Using OpenXML together with Excel and VBA is really a story where they are better together than used separately. You can implement scenarios using the two of them together that would be pretty hard to implement using just one of the two sets of tools. That's all I'm going to cover in this video. Thanks for watching. Talk to you next time.